Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The Charleston sunlight filtered through the blinds of Whitmore and Associates' medical office, casting luminous lines across the pristine tiled floor. The walls were adorned with diplomas and certificates, testaments to years of study and achievement, yet which, paradoxically, seemed to mask a cold arrogance. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a perfectly tailored suit, settled behind his desk with the mixture of self-assurance and disdain for which he was known. That morning, the secretary announced Vanessa Taylor's arrival. The name vaguely rang a bell, but he didn't even bother to check her file before muttering, "Make her wait." In his eyes, she was just another patient. What he didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't just any patient. At 35, she had already made a name for herself in the upper echelons of the state's legal system. A civil rights lawyer, she had argued high-profile cases and influenced local reforms. Her presence was not insignificant. She represented exactly what Whitmore unconsciously despised. Vanessa entered the waiting room with a calm and confident stride. She wore an impeccable navy suit and carried a simple leather handbag, symbols of understated yet determined elegance. She settled in, absently flipping through a medical journal, aware that time would drag on as the doctor, in his arrogance, decided to make her wait. Every minute she spent waiting was a silent demonstration of his contempt, but Vanessa knew she would remain calm, her face impassive. An hour passed. The ticking of the clock became a cruel reminder of the subtle but palpable humiliation. She saw Dr. Whitmore walk down the corridor several times, casting barely concealed glances of contempt and speaking condescendingly to his assistant. Vanessa felt an inner irritation, but she kept it in check. She knew the power of patience and dignity. When Whitmore finally entered, he said, with a polite but cold smile, "We'll get started. I'm very busy today." Vanessa, in a measured and composed voice, simply replied, "Thank you, doctor." She knew that every word, every gesture, would be observed and interpreted. What he didn't yet know was that Vanessa Taylor wielded the kind of power and influence that could shake careers to their core. That morning, a simple, unjustified lateness wasn't just a matter of wasted time, it was the beginning of a life lesson Whitmore would never forget. Vanessa's patience, dignity, and composure would transform this encounter into a moment where arrogance and racism would be confronted relentlessly and subtly. Vanessa Taylor sat in the waiting room of Dr. Whitmore's office. Her fingers absently brushed against the cover of a medical magazine, but her mind was elsewhere. Each tick of the clock seemed to resonate like a cruel reminder. She was forced to wait, not for a medical reason, but because of the color of her skin. The room was elegant, almost too perfect, with its cream walls and framed diplomas, but this perfection masked the arrogance that reigned there. Whitmore, seated behind his glass desk, typed away on his computer with feigned concentration, occasionally casting a condescending glance at Vanessa. Finally, his assistant entered, looking embarrassed. "Doctor, Mrs. Taylor is here." "Yes, yes. I'll see her later," replied Whitmore in a dry, almost contemptuous tone. Vanessa sighed silently, but maintained her straight, calm, and dignified posture. She knew the codes of arrogance. Getting angry would only fuel prejudice. She watched the other patients leave the office, surprised to see how Dr. Whitmore seemed to choose those he deemed worthy of his time. After almost an hour, Whitmore finally got up and called to him. "Miss Taylor, we will begin. I am very busy today." Vanessa stood up slowly, adjusted her suit, and replied in a calm voice. "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate that you finally took the time to see me." Whitmore, smiling but barely perceptible nervousness, failed to notice the subtlety of her words. He thought he had the situation under control. Yet, what he didn't know was that Vanessa Taylor wasn't just a patient, she was an influential lawyer, and her patience was only the prelude to a lesson he would never forget. As they both sat down in the office, Vanessa mentally noted every detail, the feigned arrogance, the condescending look, the assistant's awkward silence. All of this would be important later. Today, she wasn't seeking a direct confrontation. She simply wanted Whitmore to realize, at his own pace, the injustice of his behavior. Dr. Whitmore began the examination, but his mind seemed elsewhere, too preoccupied with confirming his prejudices. Vanessa, impassive, waited for the moment when the truth about her position and influence would disrupt the dynamics of the practice. And that moment was approaching, slowly but inexorably. Dr. Whitmore finished his examination superficially, barely paying attention to Vanessa's precise and measured answers. He quickly noted things in her file, barely looking up at her, convinced that he was in control of the situation. Vanessa, sitting upright in the chair, remained calm. She observed every gesture of the doctor, every movement of his assistant. She knew that her identity and influence had not yet been acknowledged, but she was prepared to let Whitmore deal with his own prejudices. "Doctor, I just wanted to remind you that I have an important appointment with the Taylor Foundation this morning," said Vanessa, in a neutral, almost casual tone. Whitmore frowned, pretending not to understand. "The foundation?" he repeated, his voice betraying a slight doubt. "Yes," Vanessa clarified with a slight smile. "My family manages this foundation, and we support several community projects in the city. I wouldn't want to delay these commitments," she added, perfectly calm. The doctor looked away, unsettled by Vanessa's precision and confidence. He turned back to his assistant. "Check that, quickly." The assistant, visibly uncomfortable, picked up his phone and scrolled through the notes in the system. "Doctor, that's right. Vanessa Taylor is Marcus Taylor's daughter. He's, very influential in the city." Whitmore felt an icy chill creep up his spine. The patient he had judged solely on her appearance was no ordinary citizen, she was the center of a powerful local influence. Every arrogant gesture he had made in the past few hours was now coming back to haunt him. Vanessa, observing his reaction, remained impassive. No triumphant smile, no mockery. Her complete control of the situation amplified Whitmore's discomfort. She had planted a seed. He would soon understand that he had underestimated the power of his prejudices and that arrogance could backfire. The doctor, aware of his clumsiness, tried to regain control. "Well, let's continue the examination, with more attention," he said, his voice betraying an unusual nervousness. Vanessa nodded gently, knowing that the real examination was not limited to a medical diagnosis. She was observing Whitmore's morals and behavior, and every passing second brought him closer to the moment when he would have to face the truth. Whitmore tried to regain his composure, but an unusual tension now hung in the office. Every move he made seemed watched, analyzed. Vanessa said nothing, but her calm, confident gaze revealed that she had understood the rules of the game from the start. "Doctor," Vanessa began calmly, "could you confirm that all my medical information is correctly recorded in your system? I want to make sure that no errors occur," she added, almost innocently. Whitmore, feeling uneasy, nodded quickly. He realized that his rapid notes and condescending demeanor would now be scrutinized. The assistant, sensing the doctor's discomfort, tried to change the subject. "Doctor, I received a call, regarding the Taylor Foundation." Yes, let me check," said Whitmore, a little too quickly. Vanessa watched the exchange closely. She knew the element of surprise was working. The doctor had just realized he had underestimated the patient he thought he could control. She maintained a neutral tone, letting Whitmore grapple with his conscience and his arrogance. "I believe," she said calmly, "that you have overlooked certain aspects of my files. I would be happy to help you review them, if that is convenient for you." Whitmore felt a pang of shame. Every word from Vanessa, though polite, weighed heavily on his pride. She didn't shout or rebuke him, but her composure and precision made the doctor understand that he had just been caught out. For the first time, Whitmore realized he had judged this woman based on his own prejudices. His moments of arrogance and contempt were catching up with him. Vanessa, with infinite patience, had just transformed a simple medical appointment into a silent lesson in respect and dignity. "Very well," Whitmore finally murmured, almost to himself. "We will proceed with care." Vanessa smiled inwardly. The game was far from over, but she had just planted the first seed of awareness in the doctor's mind. She knew that arrogance had consequences, and Whitmore had just experienced that firsthand without even having to raise her voice. As Whitmore was about to resume the examination, his assistant's phone vibrated on the desk. The assistant answered quickly, visibly nervous. Yes, yes. I understand. Okay, thank you. Whitmore, intrigued, frowned. What is this about? The assistant, hesitating, replied. Doctor, it's, about Vanessa Taylor. You know, the patient you, kept waiting this morning. Whitmore crossed his arms, a mixture of curiosity and concern appearing on his face. Yes? Well? The assistant took a deep breath. She is the daughter of Marcus Taylor, a very influential philanthropist and businessman in the city. She oversees the Taylor Foundation, which manages numerous community projects and directly influences several local institutions, including some that could affect your professional reputation. Whitmore felt an icy chill run down his spine. All this time, he had judged this woman solely on her appearance. Every minute he had spent making her wait, every condescending remark he had whispered to his assistant, was now coming back to haunt him. Vanessa sat quietly, observing his reaction. No mocking smile, no excessive gestures. Her controlled calm amplified the doctor's discomfort. She had let Whitmore reveal himself, his arrogance had just collided with a truth he could no longer ignore. I see, Whitmore finally murmured, trying to hide his embarrassment. Yes, replied Vanessa, in a soft but firm voice, it's always good to know who you're talking to before judging. A heavy silence filled the room. Whitmore, for the first time, realized that her actions had tangible consequences. Vanessa was not simply a patient, she was a woman with influence, power, and determination. She calmly continued. Doctor, I am not here to humiliate you. I am here to ensure my health is properly monitored. But I believe this experience should also remind you that dignity and respect never depend on skin color or social status. Whitmore remained silent, unable to respond immediately. He understood that control of the situation was no longer in his hands. Vanessa Taylor had just redefined the rules, and he was merely a powerless spectator to his own arrogance. For the first time, the doctor felt the fragility of his power and the quiet strength of a woman he had thought he could underestimate. The lesson had barely begun. A few days after his appointment, Whitmore thought he could put the incident behind him. But he quickly discovered that arrogance comes at a price. Colleagues and patients, alerted by whispers and hearsay, began to question his behavior. His name was now circulating within the city's small professional network, and Vanessa Taylor's story was slowly surfacing. One morning, his assistant entered, visibly anxious. Doctor, you should take a look at your emails. Several messages concern your appointment with Vanessa Taylor, and some are from the Taylor Foundation itself. Whitmore opened his inbox and read the messages. The words were polite, but firm. They emphasized the unjustified lateness, the lack of consideration, and the blatant arrogance during the meeting. Each email was a reminder that his behavior was no longer private, that it had tangible consequences. A few hours later, Vanessa herself made a discreet call to the hospital administration. Hello, this is Vanessa Taylor. I simply want to ensure that my recent experience with Dr. Whitmore is documented and taken into account to improve patient service. I believe everyone deserves the same respect and dignity. Whitmore felt his stomach clench. His career, built on years of impeccable reputation, was now exposed to the opinions of his peers and local institutions. He realized that underestimating Vanessa Taylor had been a monumental strategic error. Vanessa, for her part, remained calm and composed. She had never sought to humiliate, only to have the injustice recognized. Her influence, subtle but real, was beginning to produce tangible effects. Whitmore now had to face the consequences of his actions, not through anger or confrontation, but through the silent power of dignity and justice. That day, Whitmore understood that arrogance, when driven by prejudice, could turn against oneself with a force that no medical expertise could counter. And Vanessa Taylor, with her calm and influence, had just taught him a lesson he would never forget. The following morning, Whitmore was summoned by the hospital director, Dr. Samuel Harding. Upon arriving in the director's office, he sensed the gravity of the situation. Several of his colleagues were also present, their expressions serious and measured. "Dr. Whitmore," Dr. Harding began, "we have received several complaints regarding your behavior with Ms. Vanessa Taylor during her last appointment. We need to discuss this." Whitmore attempted to downplay the situation. "It was nothing, just a slight delay. She was, patient." "Dr. Whitmore," Dr. Harding interrupted, "the problem isn't simply the delay. It's about how you treated a patient. We've reviewed the messages, the testimonies, and it's clear that your attitude was perceived as condescending, discriminatory, and unprofessional." The colleagues present nodded silently in agreement. Whitmore felt the pressure mounting. He was no longer in his office, surrounded by his usual power, but facing a wall of consequences he could not ignore. A few hours later, Vanessa was invited to a mediation meeting, not to seek revenge, but to clarify the situation and propose constructive solutions. She entered the room with her calm demeanor and confident smile, and the mere sight of her made Whitmore's face turn slightly pale. "Dr. Whitmore," Vanessa began calmly, "I'm not here to attack you personally. My goal is to ensure that all patients, regardless of their background or status, are treated with respect and dignity." Whitmore, realizing his mistake, tried to reply, but words failed him. Vanessa continued. "I propose that we work together to put in place procedures that guarantee fair treatment for all patients. This will benefit not only the patients, but also the image of the hospital." The atmosphere in the room changed. Vanessa, through her composure and diplomacy, transformed a confrontation into an opportunity for change. Whitmore understood that he had to accept this lesson, not as a humiliation, but as a chance for professional and personal redemption. As he left the meeting, Whitmore realized that Vanessa Taylor's influence far exceeded what he had imagined. She had used calm, precision, and dignity to transform a humiliating situation into a catalyst for real change. In the days that followed, Whitmore could no longer ignore the situation. Every interaction with his colleagues, every email from the administration, reminded him of his clumsiness and arrogance. He found himself replaying the gestures, the words, and the looks he had directed at Vanessa Taylor that day. One morning, sitting alone in his office, he murmured to himself, "How could I have been so blind?" He thought back to Vanessa's patience, her composure, her dignity. He understood that this wasn't just a personal affront, but a cruel reminder that racism and arrogance had consequences. His degrees and experience couldn't erase what he had done. Later that day, the administration asked him to attend a series of seminars on respecting and including patients. Whitmore, initially reluctant, realized that this was not just a punishment, it was a chance to rehabilitate himself and learn to treat each patient fairly. Vanessa, for her part, continued to act calmly and subtly. She made recommendations to improve patient reception and staff training. Her positive influence began to be felt throughout the hospital, and even Whitmore couldn't help but acknowledge the effectiveness of her approach. One evening, as he was putting away his files, Whitmore reflected on his own words and actions. He realized that respect wasn't a matter of status or power, but of recognizing the humanity of each individual. For the first time, he wondered how he could have been so wrong. Vanessa, without even intervening directly, had transformed a simple medical encounter into a life lesson. Whitmore realized he had to change, not only for his career, but for himself. And he understood that this change would begin with a simple but sincere act, acknowledging his mistakes and treating every patient with dignity, without exception. For the first time, the arrogance that had guided her actions was cracking, giving way to a slow but irreversible awakening. Vanessa Taylor hadn't shouted, hadn't accused anyone, she had simply demonstrated the quiet strength of justice and respect. A few weeks later, the hospital held a general meeting to discuss new procedures aimed at improving patient reception and equitable treatment. Whitmore was to attend, aware that this meeting would be a moment of indirect confrontation with his own past arrogance. As soon as he entered the auditorium, he felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. Some were supportive, others critical. Vanessa Taylor spoke first. Her voice was calm, clear, and confident. thank you all for being here. Today, we want to talk about respect and dignity in the treatment of patients. Every person deserves the same care and attention, regardless of their color, status, or origin. Whitmore, sitting in the doctor's row, felt his heart sink. Every word echoed like a reminder of his past mistakes. Vanessa didn't mention him directly, but every participant knew what she was referring to. When it was his turn to speak, Whitmore took a deep breath. He stood up slowly and, in front of everyone, admitted, I was arrogant and prejudiced. I misjudged a patient and I sincerely regret my behavior. I have come to understand that dignity and respect are not optional, but essential in our work. A hush fell over the room, then a murmur of approval arose. Vanessa, seated at the front, looked at him with a slight, approving smile. She had never sought to humiliate him in public, but her influence had led Whitmore to confront his mistakes in a genuine and responsible manner. After the meeting, Whitmore felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the critical stares wouldn't disappear immediately, but he had taken the first step toward true redemption. Vanessa Taylor's lesson was no longer just an individual experience, it had become an example for the entire hospital. At that precise moment, Whitmore understood that true power lay not in authority or knowledge, but in the ability to learn from one's mistakes, to change, and to respect each person for who they truly are. A few weeks after the public meeting, Whitmore had begun a process of transformation. The training seminars on patient inclusion and respect had opened his eyes to the importance of listening, patience, and empathy. Every day, he made a conscious effort to treat each patient fairly. He took the time to listen to them, answer their questions, and ensure they felt valued. Colleagues who had observed his arrogant behavior began to notice the change. Dr. Whitmore, said a young assistant one morning, I must say that your approach with patients has changed a lot. People feel more at ease. Whitmore nodded, grateful, but humble. I learned that arrogance and prejudice can ruin a career and lives. You have to be vigilant and conscious of every gesture and every word. Vanessa Taylor, always present behind the scenes, continued to positively influence the hospital's culture. She participated in advisory committees, offered recommendations, and encouraged initiatives aimed at improving equity and respect. One afternoon, Whitmore crossed paths with her in the corridor. She smiled at him slightly, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and respect. Thank you, he said simply. You did the work yourself, Vanessa replied gently. But it's important to remember that dignity and respect are everyday values, not just one-off lessons. This was a pivotal moment for Whitmore. He realized that Vanessa had never sought to belittle him, but rather to raise his awareness and transform the dynamics around her. Her positive influence had begun to create a ripple effect. Other doctors and assistants were now following her example, inspired by the real and visible change in her behavior. For Whitmore, this transformation wasn't just professional. It touched his humanity and the way he perceived others. He had learned to recognize the importance of humility, listening, and respect, and he knew that this change, although initiated by Vanessa, was now an integral part of himself. A few months after the incident, the atmosphere in Dr. Whitmore's office had completely changed. Patients, previously intimidated or frustrated by his arrogance, now showed genuine trust in him. His colleagues noticed not only his transformed behavior, but also his ability to inspire and guide others. Whitmore, alone in his office one afternoon, looked out the window. He recalled the moment Vanessa Taylor had entered, calm and dignified, and he had wrongly judged her. He smiled slightly, aware that this experience had been the most valuable of his career, a lesson in dignity, respect, and humility. Vanessa, for her part, continued to work for justice and equity, not only in the medical system but throughout the entire community. Her actions had inspired concrete changes within the hospital, and her influence was felt in even the smallest interactions. One day, during an internal ceremony to congratulate staff for their efforts in respect and inclusion, Whitmore addressed everyone. I want to share something important with you. A few months ago, I acted arrogantly and prejudiciously toward a patient, Vanessa Taylor. This experience was both a shock and a valuable lesson. Through her patience, dignity, and influence, I learned that every person deserves the same respect and consideration. I am here today to thank Vanessa and to commit to ensuring that this lesson guides every interaction in our hospital." A respectful silence filled the room, followed by warm applause. Vanessa, sitting in the front row, gave her an approving smile. She had never sought recognition, but the change she had inspired was now manifesting itself tangibly. Whitmore then understood that true power lay not in knowledge, position, or reputation, but in the ability to listen, learn, and evolve. Thanks to Vanessa, he had not only changed the way he treated patients, but he had also learned to see beyond appearances and prejudices. The story of this doctor and patient became an example in the hospital, a reminder that dignity and respect are the pillars of true humanity. And Whitmore, transformed, knew that this lesson would guide him for the rest of his life.